but I have pre-recorded this presentation, so I'm going to play that, and there's my contact at the end of the slide if anyone's interested. So let me take it away. Bom dia, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I apologize for not being there in person, but as I had explained to the organizers, I'm beginning my classes at the same time as the schedule of this session. But there's my contact at the end of the presentation, so feel free to shoot me an email should you have any follow-up questions. I would like to start by talking about language choice in bilinguals, but language choice not so much as such as this one.
Please welcome Hugh Laurie and Helen Mirren.
Well, Mr. Laurie and I are both very, very proud to be presenting an award in such a prestigious ceremony. And
Monsieur Laurie et moi-même sommes très très fiers de présenter le prix d'une si prestigieuse catégorie.
you know, every year the Academy
Vous savez que chaque année, l'Académie
has the difficult
a la
task
tâche presque impossible
of winnowing
de winnowing
literally hundreds of stunning performances down to a meager list of just 5.
5.
This year has been harder than ever. I now ask Mr. Laurie to read the nominations for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Miniseries or Movie properly.
Yes.
Now, the language choices that I'm going to be talking about are what has sometimes been referred to as emotionally related language choice. That is the observation that when bilinguals speak their first language, they are more personal and subjective, and when they speak their second language, they are more distanced and objective. And this is a perception that can be felt both by speakers and in the audience. And you can find this a lot among bilingual writers who, despite having high proficiency in several languages, will typically only be writing in one of them. And here you can observe two trends. That is, there are those writers who tend to write in only their first language because they think that is the only one capable of expressing the emotional content that they want to carry across. But then there are also writers who will be using their second language because they want to distance themselves from the emotional and traumatic experiences and events that they're going to write about. In some cases, this trend can take the form of self-imposed language attrition, where the speaker may try and forego the language altogether. But of course, it's not just writers who display this contrast between the first language being more emotional and the second one being more distant. You find that a lot in binational or multilingual couples, where often in the heat of the argument, the partners are going to switch back into their first languages, even though their spouse may not understand that language. And here, a particularly interesting quote is the last one, where we can see that if Kurt has a bit of time, he is going to inject sarcasm into the message, and he's going to carry that message across in his second language. And there is more evidence for this divide between the more emotional first language and the more distant second language. For instance, studies looking at psychotherapy of bilinguals found that they typically prefer the sessions to be carried out in the second language because that allows them to step outside of the situation to view it from a distance. Then experiments using galvanic skin response, that is skin electroconductivity, showed that bilinguals display stronger emotional reactions to taboo words and reprimands, such as shame on you, when these are heard in the first language than in the second language. There were also studies showing that there is a contrast in the recall of emotionally charged words versus neutral words in the first language, but that contrast is not visible in the L2. So far, this is a nice, clear-cut, black and white picture, but we decided to investigate whether there might be more to it than that. And we decided to do so using swear words as stimuli. So we devised a task where highly proficient Polish, L1 Polish, L2 English bilinguals were asked to translate a text brimming with swear words, either from the first language to the second language or from the second language to the first language. And now the hypothesis, or the expected hypothesis, was that those translations that were done into the second language would increase the offensiveness of the swear words, and those that would be done into the first language would decrease their offensiveness. However, we posited two possible mechanisms behind that trend. So one would be the typical emotional spontaneity explanation that we've just discussed. However, we posited that there might be another mechanism at play as well, namely that when we grow up during the first years of age, we are being told what is polite, what is not polite, which words can be used, which words should not be used. And that information is conveyed to us in our first language. When we start learning a second language or a foreign language, especially if we start doing that in a school setting, this takes place at a later age when it's expected that we've already been brought up to some extent. And even if we still receive feedback on our behavior, that feedback is much more likely to again take place in the first language rather than the second or foreign language. This means that using our first language, we may have that baggage of upbringing and political correctness at the back of our minds, which will be absent when we use the second language. So as I mentioned, we gave the participants a text that was brimming with expletives. They were expected to translate it from one language to the other language. And 2 weeks after the experiment, they were each sent a list of the swear words from the source text and the translational equivalents they themselves provided. So each participant got a different list of expressions, and they were asked to gauge the offensiveness of those expressions, so that we know that if someone used a stronger word, they knew that it was stronger. If someone toned down the offensiveness of an expression, we know that they were aware of the fact that the other expression was weaker in that respect. And there were 2 categories of swear words that we employed. So we used your generic run-of-the-mill 4-letter words that you can use in any context. And we also used a special category of slurs, that is ethnofaulisms. Those are expressions used to offend other outgroup minorities, such as ethnic minorities. To that group, we also added expressions used to offend sexual minorities. Now, when we sent the findings to the first journal, a linguistics journal, the editors replied, "This is a very interesting study, but some of the audience might be offended, as if oblivious of this function of language." So we submitted it to another journal whose impact factor is 3 times higher. The paper is out in open access, everyone can read it, but there are offensive expressions there. So if you don't want to see them, you may close your eyes for the next 30 seconds or so. Otherwise, you can take a look at the English language stimulus, and you will probably very quickly notice the 2 categories of swear words, that is the generic ones and ethnofaulisms. Let's now look at the findings. As expected, with one exception, we find that the participants used stronger swear words when they were translating into their second language, and weaker words when they were translating into their first language, but that contrast is only visible in the case of ethnofaulisms, not in the case of generic swear words. which you would expect if it were only a matter of emotions playing a role. So it seems that it's the upbringing and the social norms that we have at the back of our heads when we use our first language that's responsible for the results, and that those chains of political correctness are removed once you switch into the realm of the second language. Now, after our experiment, there came a spate of studies looking at what is now called the foreign language effect, that is investigating the influence of language choice on social norms and evaluation of moral decisions and the decisions that are taken. The best known of these is a study by Costa and colleagues where they used a version of the Trolley problem, and they asked bilingual participants whether or what they would do in the following situation. So there are 4 or 5 people down the railway tracks, and there's a train barreling down. They either can't hear and see the train, or they can't move out of the tracks, so they're going to get killed. Now you're standing on a footbridge, and there's this big guy sitting there. If you push the guy down onto the tracks, he's going to get killed, but the train is going to stop by the time it reaches the further people down the road. So 1 person dies, but 4 or 5 stay alive. And bilingual participants were asked whether they would push the guy down. Now, those who were asked that question in the first language, in that group, fewer than 20% responded in the affirmative. In an equivalent group asked the same question in the second language, the percentage of positive responses rose to 50%, so 2.5 times as many participants said that they would do so. Other studies looked at, for instance, the evaluation of more or less serious violations of social norms, and found that in the second language, people were typically more lenient than in their first language. There were also studies looking at the degree of attention accorded to intentions versus outcomes of actions. And these studies in turn showed that when a moral dilemma was presented in the first language, people were paying more attention to intentions than if that dilemma was presented in the second language. Now, this year we extended that context into the contrast between the second and the third language, because the foreign language effect has not yet been investigated in the third language. And in line with our assumptions, if it's the first language where we have information about social norms and political correctness, but we don't get that in the second language, then the third language should pattern more or less the same as the second language. So if you try to draw a parallel with cross-linguistic influence studies, you'd have an L2 status factor there. And indeed, that is what we found. That is, there was a contrast between the evaluation of situations in the first and second language, but not in the second versus the third language. What mattered in those scenarios were factors such as age and gender, but the second versus third language didn't show a contrast. Now, if you're interested in the write-up of our original paper, that's the reference at the bottom of the page. It's out in open access, no paywall there. And then if I could use the remaining 30 seconds of my talk, we're currently carrying out a study investigating a number of psychological traits that influence students' perception of online versus face-to-face language courses. We already have 3-digit responses from Western Europe and North America, but we need a bit more for structural equation models, as well as it would be great to have more contexts represented. So if you have students who have been learning a foreign language either face-to-face or online, and would have around 17 minutes. This is a study that received ethics clearance. It's pre-registered. If you could share the link in the middle of the page, we'd be very grateful. Thank you very much for listening. Muito obrigado. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to shoot me an email. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Fantastic. He was able to do it just in time with his video. Amazing indeed. So as he's not present, we have planned to have our questions for last, right? But then you can direct your questions about his paper directly to him, right? To his email. He provided his email here. I can also put it here for you guys. So I also shared the link, right, of the study he mentioned here in the chat. And this is his email, right? At the beginning, he apologized that he wouldn't be able to be here. Then we have our next presenter. Let me just, he said that I should kick him out. I don't really know how to do it. Remove. Okay. Nice. Hello, Alessia.
Bom dias. Now I'll try to share my screen, my presentation. One moment, please.
You see your, are you used to Google Meet or not?
It tells the truth, not, but
You see the hand down here?
I know. I guess that I should click on the icon that false, and sorry.
No problem. If you want me to also to present it for you, feel free to send me an email, okay?
Okay, can I send you my presentation and you will be able to open it? Maybe.
Don't worry, Alessia. It's nice to meet you, by the way, to put a face on the name. Don't worry, we have time. Just a second, guys.
Maybe I should, it's a pity, but maybe I should start without presentation. No, let's see.
So if you put it here in presentation, what does it happen? Beside of the hand here, you have the square, right? For presentation. And then you have entire screen usually works. Did you try that?
Во-первых, я понимаю, что меня снимают, но я не вижу. Не вижу, где этот limit.
Would you like to enter, to leave and enter again? Sometimes it works.
Уже я даже не вижу, не могу выйти, посмотреть. Не помню, где это. Слушай, ну я-то вышла, я обратно не могу. В чем проблема? Сейчас я тебя брошу. Так, а теперь, чтобы я себя увидела, вот это вопрос. Она выглядит, вот эта иконка, картинка не гонит. Так, слушай, может мне выйти и опять зайти? Может, нет.
Okay, Alessa, just send me your presentation, okay? Otherwise, we'll keep doing.
Okay, I asked my colleague, she will try, Marina Savko, she will try to share my presentation. Yes, she is a participant too for this conference.
That's all right.
Okay.
Nice.
Hello, can you see the presentation? I'm sorry, interrupting.
Yes.
Yes. Right, perfect.
Thank you, perfect. Okay, bon dia. Yes. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for holding such an important scientific event. I wish your conference become traditional, and it's a pleasure for me to speak as a part of such an eminent scientific community. So my topic is the image of the Italian bilingual region in the commercial names, variability of perception. In the modern world, on the background of active migration processes that cover almost all European states and contribute to the intensification of language context, there are shifts in the structural and content characteristics of the communicative portrait of regions. The need to study the principles and patterns of these changes determines the relevance of this study. This study is a part of a larger project that aims to create a communicative portrait of the bilingual Italian region of Valle d'Aosta. At this stage, the goal is to identify the variability in the interpretation of the names of hotels in the Valle d'Aosta region among representatives of different regions of Italy. As a hypothesis, it is suggested that the names of commercial objects have a certain set of associations among native Italian speakers living in different regions of the Apennine Peninsula. Individual consciousness is formed through actions with objects according to the rules of a given culture by assimilating various types of meaning: operational, objective, and verbal. Thus, behind the system of linguistic meanings of an individual is a subjective image of the objective world, in which elements containing both universal and culturally specific knowledge interact. The content of this knowledge is reflected in the everyday consciousness of a native speaker of a language, culture, and to a certain extent lends itself to study through its verbal representations. Association experiment provides an opportunity to identify this knowledge reflected in the associative meanings of words. Thus, the associative verbal network, built on the basis of material from mass associative experiments, can be considered a model of ordinary human consciousness. Before proceeding to the description of the result of the experiment, I would like to explain the language situation in the region, how the selection of stimuli was carried out. The interest in the region is not accidental. It is due to its autonomous status. Today, French and Italian are the state languages here. In addition, the Franco-Provençal language, the mountainous Alemannic dialect of the German language, as well as the Valdostan dialect of French and the Valdostan dialect of the Franco-Provençal language, are widespread in the territory. The situation of multilingualism undoubtedly affects the structural and content characteristics of the egonomicon of the area under consideration. Therefore, the analysis also took into account the linguistic feature of hotel names. First phase. The material of this study was the names of a hotel in the Italian region of Valle d'Aosta. To create a sample of analysis units, the Booking.com online service was used. The name Valle d'Aosta was entered into the search box, and the filter hotel was also set. Thus, 187 items were identified, which were subsequently subjected to a multi-phase study. Second phase. Here, the linguistic diversity of egonyms should be noted. Analysis of the sample by language showed that French, English, Swedish, German are used to name hotels in the region. In addition, the names of hotels of a hybrid type were revealed, in which various language combinations are presented. During the analysis, it was found that French constitute nearly 55% and Italian 23%. Here, they are from the most active. Hybrid names, along with English ones, account for about 20%, and cases of using Swedish and German are very poor. The data obtained related to the peculiarity of the Italian region of Valle d'Aosta. This is the only region of Italy that has a common border with France. With France, linguistic Franco-Valle d'Aostan context date back to the time of the emergence of the French language itself. The Valdostan region has the status of an autonomous region, and at the state level, in the legislation on its territory, French and Italian are fixed as state languages. This, despite the fact that researchers agree on the fading, the result that you saw on the table are contradictory to the researchers' analysis of the linguistic situation, because linguistic researchers agree on the fading role of the French language in the region. And according to my research, investigation, we see that there are some areas of the functioning of French language in which it does not give up its positions. The thematic variability of the name of hotels was noted, which predetermined the further course of the study. So the third phase. At the next stage, an attempt was made to systematize the material, taking into account the motivational features that underlie the naming of hotels. Quantitative processing of the research material showed that among the names of hotels in French and Italian, the most represented are names formed on the basis of toponyms and denominations of persons. Thus, 20 hotel names were selected for the experiment. The 20 hotels names were selected for the experiment, 10 in Italian and 10 in French. The motivational feature of which is the nomination of a person. Respondents are 20 persons, about 1,000 reactions were received. Last phase. This is the phase of the associative experiment. We used a questionnaire through the Google instrument. During this survey, the respondents answered 2 blocks of questions. The first one contains questions characterizing the informant, age, nationality, etc. The second one contains the names of hotels of the regions with accompanying questions. As a result, a set of reactions was obtained, and the analysis of which made it possible to identify similar and different ones. Based on the material of the associative experiment, semantic zone was built for each stimuli. According to the method of Yuri Karaulov, he represents the Moscow School of Psycholinguistics. As a result, the following zones were identified. Maybe I'll go further. I won't explain what each zone means. I will leave my email Festa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alexa.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. Obrigada a você. And we'll leave the questions for last, okay? Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me at all? Oh, great. So
Yes.
I'll start.
Hello. You're
Hello.
next, right?
Yes.
No?
I'll start presenting then.
Я очень может, спасибо тебе большое.
Can you see the screen? Full screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia. I am a student of neurosciences in Federal University of ABC in Brazil. And I'm here to present the project Cross-Linguistic and Cross-Cultural Adaptation and Applicability Testing of the Multilingual Naming Test for Portuguese English and Portuguese Spanish bilinguals under the supervision of Dr. Maria Teresa. So characterizing and quantifying bilingual proficiency is an essential part of bilingualism research, and two types of measures are usually applied for that characterization. Subjective ones, usually by self-report, that can be done by questionnaires or scales. And despite being very common, they have proven to have low accuracy and also high variability depending on participants, their age, the target language being evaluated, and also the scale being used. And the other measure is the objective kind that allows standardization of proficiency assessment, and also further on allows comparison across studies. And amongst them, we can point out the naming tests, and a prominent one right now is the multilingual naming test developed by Golan and collaborators. It evaluates the following languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, Chinese, and Hebrew. And it was validated in different contexts with young and older bilinguals, as well as in the context of research of degenerative diseases. And it is composed by 68 black and white images that are organized in ascending level of difficulty and are presented sequentially to participants to name in both of the test languages. So first they answer it in one language and then in the other. And given the preeminence of this test and to contribute to methodological improvements in bilingualism research with Brazilian participants, this study had the aim to conduct a cross-cultural and cross-linguistic adaptation of the MINT for Portuguese-speaking bilinguals, more specifically those who speak English and Spanish, and to verify its applicability in a sample of bilinguals whose first or second language is Portuguese. So to do that, we started with an adaptation phase done by online forms in which the participants were adults with at least full high school education, and they had to evaluate original and substitute stimuli in terms of a few characteristics. And the substitutes were needed to maintain the precedent of the original test of excluding cognates. So participants were only evaluated in their target language. And for English, we had to do 2 substitutions. And for Spanish, there was a total of 28 substitutions. And here we have a couple of the substitutes and a couple of the original ones, just to showcase how we intended to maintain style and visual complexity for the substitutes. And they were substituted based on the length of the original stimuli name and also lexical frequency. So we tried to maintain those as close to the original as possible. So we had 2 forms for this phase. The first one, we evaluated visual complexity and familiarity using a 7-point Likert scale, in which 1 corresponded to low complexity or low familiarity with the image, and 7 to high visual complexity or familiarity with the image. And we also had a second form in which we evaluated the age of acquisition, also in a 7-point Likert scale, in which 1 corresponded to the interval between 0 and 2 years of age, and 7 to 13 years or more in terms of having acquired the concept represented by the image. And we also asked participants to name the images so we could posteriorly define naming agreement analysis. We also analyzed for all original and substitute stimuli and their extential and the lexical frequency based on different databases for each language. And the second phase was testing the applicability of the adapted test. We did that by video conference with 40 participants in the English-Portuguese version. 1 participant had to be excluded because we had a sample of people with L1 as Portuguese, and this person didn't. And for the Spanish, so far we still have low number of participants, so I will only be presented preliminary data, but we have Brazilians who speak Spanish, as well as people who have Spanish as their first language and also speak Portuguese. And alongside the MINT, we also applied 2 questionnaires for linguistic characterization and assessment of self-report, the language experience and proficiency questionnaire, and the language history questionnaire, both in Portuguese. So for the first phase, the first form, we had 49 answers. And in general, we had the visual complexity of the images being evaluated in an interval from 2 to 6 in the 7-point scale, indicating there is a lack of uniformity between the images, which wasn't expected. And in terms of familiarity, the results were between 4 and 6, with a mean of 6.5, indicating participants had a high familiarity with these stimuli, which was not expected. We hoped that, well, we didn't hope, we imagined that the most frequent images would be more familiar than the less frequent ones, but all seem to be quite familiar to participants. And in the second form, we had 28 answers. And in terms of age of acquisition, we saw expected results in which most frequently used words were acquired earlier than those less frequent in lexicon. And in terms of naming agreement, in percentage, there was a general adequacy to the original expected names, with a few exceptions that I brought here in images. Rake, which isn't something very well known in the Brazilian context. Barometer also had a lot of different namings, and porthole as well. And in the second phase, talking about the English, Portuguese English version, we had then 39 answers. There was an evaluated greater exposition to Portuguese than English in percentage, which was expected given the context of the bilinguals we were working with. Most of them are inserted in the Brazilian context and have Portuguese as their L1. And in terms of self-report acquired by the questionnaires, there was a higher level of proficiency in Portuguese than English based on participants' self-assessment. And for the MINT, there was a congruence. There were more correct answers in Portuguese than in English. And in terms of correlation of the quantitative variables, we saw significant correlations of this subjective scores within and between subjective questionnaires. So all the different ratings from the LibQ and the LHQ between themselves, but also like different scores from LibQ with the LHQ, all with language specifically, except for the self-report English and Portuguese, which had also significant correlation. But there was no significant correlation found between the subjective measures from the self-reports and the objective measures measured by the MINT. They were actually pretty low, except for the MINT in English and the reading in English for the LibQ, which had a significant correlation. And for the Spanish, since we have such a small number so far, I didn't bring any statistical analysis, just an overview. We had all participants have better scores in their first language. And for those who the first language was Spanish, they actually would perform better in the L2 in comparison with the Brazilians who had Spanish as an additional language. And we really want to expand the study so we can have more robust numbers to actually conduct quantitative analysis and understand the workings of the applicability of this adapted test for Spanish. So in general, we can say that for the adaptation, there was a general suitability of the test given the analyzed metrics in the corresponding phase, with few modifications needed regarding low frequency stimuli and reordination of stimuli based on lexical frequency in Portuguese. Further on, we would like to expand the number of participants to have a better understanding of the needed things to have changed in the adaptation. And in terms of applicability, only speaking for the Portuguese-English version, we have significant correlation between subjective scores in each language, but no significant correlation subjective measures and mean scores. And the low correlation between objective and subjective measures suggests that bilinguals are not precise in determining their proficiency levels. Further on, we would like to compare these results with other objective measures, such as the Leipzig vocabulary test, to test the concurrent validity of the test. So I believe this is what I wanted to bring you. I would like to thank my professor, Bilingel Car Study Group, who will be presented in this Congress as well, and particularly my peers who worked on the Spanish part of the project, Mateus and Mateus, and also all of you for the attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. Very interesting talk. So we have, as you know, we have all the questions at the end, right? Now we have Bruna.
Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, I think I can go ahead and start. So, hello, everyone. My name is Bruna, and I am going to present the study named Working Memory and Functional Morphology, Implications for Brazilian Portuguese English Bilinguals, a Sentence Recall Investigation. This study was conducted during my PhD, which was advised by Dr. Ricardo Souza and co-advised by Dr. Cândido de Oliveira. The research problem that we pursued was that working memory capacity can aid in second language development and production, according to the study that was developed when Matthew. Considering this, functional morphology is very problematic for second language learners, and it seems to be the bottleneck of second language acquisition, according to the study that Slavakova conducted. And it seems that proficiency helps a lot when second language learners are trying to use inflectional morphology, because higher proficient L2 learners can use inflectional morphology, according to the study that Rochinho, Ducis, and Kroll performed. So our first goal was to investigate whether proficient affects participants' performance when they have to detect and correct sentences that don't have the third person singular inflectional morpheme, especially in two different types of contexts. The first context is when we have long distance agreement, such as when the head of the noun phrase is distant from the verb. So in this sentence, the engineer with the tools always build big houses. The participants would need to identify the lack of the S and place it. And also in local distance agreement sentences, in which the head of noun phrase is close to the verb, such as in Sarah always eat breakfast, in which participants would need to correct and place the S. The second goal was to analyze whether the group's working memory capacity influenced their ability to detect and correct the ungrammatical sentence that we just saw, and reproduce sentences in which the morpheme was instantiated and keep it. We investigated Brazilian Portuguese English bilinguals with higher proficiency and lower proficiency, and we had a control group of English natives. Our first hypothesis was that there's a greater demand for working memory capacity for the lower proficiency group because they would have problems reproduce the grammatical sentences with the third person singular morpheme compared to the other groups. Our second hypothesis was that the proficiency level would influence the participants' ability to detect and correct these ungrammatical sentences. And the third hypothesis was that proficiency does not impact the image and recall and judgment in these groups. So we conducted a sentence recall with images. This test was implemented in the platform Toolkit, and we measured the performance of the proficiency of the participants with the vocabulary levels test, the VLT, and we used the platform class marker to implement this. Here we have an overview of the sentence recall with images. Participants would see this in every different sequence, an image to get ready for 1000 milliseconds, then the sentence for 5000 milliseconds, followed by the first image for 2000 milliseconds, and then the second image. They would have to judge whether these images were the same or not and rewrite the sentence that they saw. They received instructions that they would see sentence that there were some mistakes and they should correct it whenever they would rewrite them. We had one control condition called grammatical with 6 sentences. All of our sentences had the same pattern of subject, frequency adverb, verb, and complement. We controlled the number of syllables and characters inside each condition to have them balanced. Our control condition had a name in the subject position. We had 4 target control conditions, 2 with long distance agreement and 2 with local distance agreement. Our first long distance agreement condition, called animate, had a pattern in which the head of the noun phrase was an animate noun followed by an inanimate noun, and remembering that they had to detect the omission of the S. Our second long distance agreement condition, the inanimate, had a pattern of inanimate noun followed by an animate noun. And our local distance agreement, in the name, we had just a name. In the subject position, the pronoun, just a pronoun. In the images, we had 2 types, letters and images that didn't match, and letters and images that matched. For the letters and images that didn't match, we had different letters in the same color, same letter in different colors, and different images, the same type, such as an armchair and another armchair that was different. Letters that matched, they were just the same case, same color, and the images are exactly the same. Participants received the instruction that in order for an image to match, they should be exactly the same. We adopted a cutoff point so that participants would be eligible for the study. Participants needed to get at least 80% of the image sequences right, and they couldn't leave more than 80% of the sentence incomplete or blank. We know that this demanded a lot of working memory load, but we really encouraged our participants to do their best. So we adopted this in order to avoid that they would be just trying to get rid of the test. So our participants, we control the age from 18 to 35-year-old. They couldn't have color blindness because of the image recall. They needed to be at least high school graduates. And we had 3 groups. They needed to score VLT 5, the last level, to be considered higher proficiency, and VL2, 3, or 4, lower proficiency, and also the natives. Our results, we gathered data from 21 higher proficiency participants, 20 lower proficiency, and 12 natives. There was a lot of variability in the sentence that participants rewrote, so we had 3 interrators to have a reliability checked for the the sentence that the participants produced, and the result that you're gonna see here are based on the converging answer of these radios. So we group sentences into expected whenever they manage to correct the omission of the S, and when they reproduce it in the grammatical condition, and unexpected when they didn't place the S, and NA not applicable whenever they were incomplete and blank, and we filtered NA answers. Here we can see the results for the grammatical condition. In blue, we have the expected, and pink, the unexpected. We can see that the natives had the best performance, followed by the higher proficiency, and then the lower proficiency. We adjusted our logistic regression. We had the type of answer, expected and unexpected, as the response variable. And we also had the proficiency, higher, lower, and native as the fixed effects. All the logistic regressions that we adjust, we included random slopes for items and participants. The nested model comparison revealed that proficiency was very important to the model. So we conducted a post-hoc analysis to see where these contrasts were located. We can see that the higher proficiency and the lower proficiency comparison was just marginally significant. No significant comparison between the higher and the native, but it was significant, the contrast between the lower proficiency and the natives. So our first hypothesis was just marginally confirmed because there was no significant difference between the higher and the lower proficiency groups when they reproduced grammatical sentences. Here we have the results of our animate condition. The higher proficiency had the best result, followed by the natives, and then the lower proficiency. We adjust the same type of logistic regression, and once more, proficiency was very important to the model. We follow to the post-hoc analysis to see where the contrasts were located, and we can see that just the contrast between the higher proficiency and the lower proficiency is significant, and not even the contrast between the lower and the natives is significant. Our second target condition, our third condition, once more, higher proficiency, they could detect this lack of the morpheme and place it the S better than the natives and the lower proficiency. We adjusted the same type of logistic regression, and once more, the proficiency was very important to the model. The contrast between the higher proficiency and the lower proficiency was significant. The higher in the natives was not, and the lower in the natives was significant as well. Our third condition, this is the local condition, the local distance agreement condition, higher proficiency, best performance, followed by the natives, and the lower proficiency. Same type of logistic regression, and again, proficiency was very important to the model. Just the contrast between the higher proficiency and lower proficiency was significant to the model. The contrast between the lower proficiency and the natives was not significant. Our last target condition, again, higher proficiency participants managed to detect and correct the omission of the third person singular agreement morpheme best, followed by the natives, and then the lower proficiency. The same type of logistic regression, and again, the nested model comparison showed that proficiency was very important. Here we can see that the contrast between the higher and the lower proficiency group was significant, and the lower proficiency and the natives as well. Our second hypothesis was just partially confirmed because we could see that even though the graphs showed that there was a scale of like higher proficiency going better than the lower and the natives failed to perform better than the lower proficiency groups in our animate condition, in which the height of the noun phrase was an animate noun, and also when we had a name. And last, we have the results of the images and letters. We grouped them into expected and unexpected. And NA whenever they missed, because there was a timeout to judge, and we filtered the NA answers. We can see in blue the expected answers, and in orange the unexpected. Natives were the best, followed by the higher proficiency and the lower proficiency. We can see we adjusted logistic regression with the type of answer expected and unexpected. And we had proficiency as an fixed effects, and the nested model compare showed that the proficiency was very significant to the model. And we can see that the contrast between the higher proficiency and the lower proficiency, the higher in the native and the lower and the natives, they were all significant, statistically significant. And our third hypothesis was not confirmed because it seems that proficiency impact their performance in the working memory test. Our final remarks is that the results suggest that both proficiency and working memory were very important to perform the tasks. Future studies should explore other types of tasks, which involve also implicit and explicit knowledge to have a better understanding of the inflectional challenges for second language learners. And it's also advisable to have separate tasks for each component to analyze the role of working memory and inflectional morphology in studies with bilinguals, because in this one we had a conjoined task. Here are the reference, and here are our emails, mine, Cândido, and Ricardo, if you have any further questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bruna. Our last presenter is Khadija, but I don't see her here in our attendees. Are you here, Khadija? Let's see. Okay, I suggest we wait 1 or 2 minutes to see if she arrives. Otherwise, we can go to our questions. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, please post it on the chat. Okay, that's how I'll read them. Okay, I have no news of our next presenter, so I suggest we go for questions. Okay, so I'll ask the audience if they have any questions, or other presenters also. Sorry. Well, I have a couple of questions for some of you guys. So for the first presentation, unfortunately, Mike is not here, but he sent his email address, and also he asked us to help his group, right, with the study that they've been performing at the moment. Okay, so he sent a link to his published paper, right, in which he based his presentation, and also left a link for a study that they're applying at the moment. Okay, if any of you could help with that, would be a great thing for them, for his group, right? Also, I would like to see with Alessia. Alessia, how do I pronounce your name? Sorry if I'm doing it wrong.
In Russian, it's Alessia. In Russian, Belarusian. And in Romance languages, something like Alessia.
Alessia, okay. It's like we would do in Portuguese, probably, yeah. And so, Alessia, very interesting. You show different percentages of uses of the languages that we found in Dalostia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I'm sure you told us that, but it wasn't clear to me what was the instrument you used for collecting the data of the impressions on the names of the hotels, right? There were 20 names you said?
It was a Google form with the questions, open questions, and the first block was about the person characteristics without name, but with email, age, nationality, instruction.
Right, but what kind of questions you made? So, which characteristics you were looking for them to represent themselves?
I think that answers, responses that I received during the investigation, they these questions depend a lot on the age of the person. So I choose the persons between 25 and 35 years. Also, it was important for me, the information, the level of their instruction. So the persons, these Italian women and the gender, 50% were women, 50% men, and they were graduated or they were taking their diploma. Mm-hmm.
Right, and
this was important.
Nice. And I wasn't. Did you find differences in general responses? For instance, did we
maybe further? I would when there would be a more bigger, more persons. Now the group of 20, it's a very little group to make conclusions about the gender characteristic, gender specificity of the answers.
My hypothesis would be that it will vary, right? Their perception. depending on gender as well. Right?
Mhm.
So let's
And
hope.
also, it would be interesting to see the perception of immigrants that live in Italy for a long time. We know that now we live in the era of the migrations, so it would be very interesting to see this group, what they
That's
can
very
perceive.
interesting as well. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, thank you.
Leonardo, to whom is your answer? Your question? Sorry, is it for Alessia?
It's no, it's for Bruna. Was it Bruna who presented?
Yeah, last. Okay, Bruna. So Leonardo is asking regarding the last presentation. Oh yeah, sure. I wonder if the better performance by high proficiency speakers as compared to natives at some point represents characteristics of explicit knowledge due to intensive studying of the target language instead of linguistic subconscious processing.
Thank you, Leonardo, for the question. Yes, it's certainly some of the points that we considered. I have to say that this study was supposed to be conducted as a people would hear the sentence or read the sentence and they would have to recorrect it orally, but due to the pandemic that we faced during my PhD, we had to adapt and people had to rewrite it. And of course, when we have time to access explicit knowledge, people could have used that and this could have affected the results. But in my master's, during my thesis, I conducted a different type of experiment, which was an acceptability judgment task, and there was also a working memory load, and there was no difference between the higher and the lower proficiency participants, statistically speaking. They could both detect the omission of the morpheme at the same level, which was something that I presented in the Brazilian psycholinguistic event because I reanalyzed the data. But of course, that is something that I really need to check further in the future because I really want to implement this study in a way that people can orally correct because they wouldn't have time to access explicit knowledge. So this is something that remains to be seen.
Based on your comment, you think that people would have a more immediate memory when they, I don't know, more automatic. It should work better with speaking than with writing. That they will have a double process if they have to write down the sentence or something like that.
According to the studies that have already been performed like that, people would need their automatized knowledge to do it orally, right? They wouldn't have time. Okay, I'm writing and I have time to go back, even though there was some time they needed to do this. I'm sorry for the noise. In some time frame, they still had time to correct. I forgot that and forgot this, and especially the natives and the nature of the task that participants needed to do this. We weren't with them when they did it because it was totally online. If it was conducted in a lab, then we could be next to them. During the training, did you see that? Because I didn't show it here, but I had other conditions like typos over, like when we had a model and we don't put two after that, but we had another condition like that, and even in these conditions natives failed to correct, and there were like other natives that they at some point I think they thought they would need just to repeat what they saw, and at some point during the test they were like, okay, I have to correct, and they started correcting. You could see of course, the stimuli were randomized, but still there might be some effects. And I hope the Brazilian government give us some funding to collect data abroad in the future.
Sure. We are all hoping that from next year on, it will be better for us in science in Brazil, right? Imagine this whole Congress I had to organize only with my work and the work of my students who are monitoring, because we had no money at all. Like, well, but I'm very familiar with Bruna's work because I was in her committee, right? As well, her manuscript committee. Yeah. So Leonardo is asking a magnetoencephalogram. It will be great, but it's on the scale of millions, dozens of millions, maybe one equipment like that, right? Bruna, so there's room to think that some of the unexpected results you had, it was due to the task not being performed as you intended, right? In presence, right? Okay, there's a question from Diego. Do you have any published papers that we could find online? So people are interested in your work.
Thank you. Oh, I think there's another question from Diego about VLT. This is vocabulary levels test. I didn't have time to talk about it a lot during the presentation, but this was a test that was assembled by Nation in the 90s. But it was validated in the psycholinguistics labs in UFMG, and it was validated to be used with the Brazilian learners of English, especially the university population, to measure their proficiency level. So if you try to find Ricardo de Souza, he has some studies published about VLT with Gisele Silva and also another ones, especially in the 2015. So if you are interested in VLT, Ricardo has some papers published about that. And I published a paper in 2020 with Cândido and Ricardo about the speeded acceptability judgment that I conducted in my master's. And now I'm writing 2 papers, one to be published about that I'm gonna submit to be about the acceptability judgment with the working memory load, and the 2 back that I conducted in my master's, and another one about implicit knowledge that I conducted a self-paced reading. This one is we were writing, Cândido, Ricardo, and I. And the one about the dissertation, the PhD, I haven't started yet, but I will send the news whenever I write it. And I'm trying to do some other projects about this task adaptations. Maybe next year I will present some findings.
Thank you, Bruna. I have a question for Julia. Julia, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Nice. Thank you for your presentation as well. I have a question for you concerning the number of participants you may need for testing those different forms, right? And then my question is, how do you intend to get them, seeing that our ethics committees in Brazil put so much challenge for this kind of massive number of participants studies?
That's a good question. I still don't know the answer properly. I mean, we are having trouble finding as well the defined group, especially for Spanish, because we wanted to do CD adaptation for people who spoke Brazilian and then Spanish and then Portuguese. I said Brazilian. And it was hard to find, so we're having trouble to get to the maximum that we had on our first project. So we're still not even thinking about like the expansion. And I don't even know, I haven't thought about that extra difficulty of getting it approved. I would love tips also.
Now, you may actually have it approved, no problem. The problem is getting participants with no payment, with no,
exactly.
You cannot use any means of
retribution.
Yeah, so it becomes so complicated. In other countries in which you have the possibility of paying or giving credits, some universities are approving the credit thing. So it's something that you can try to do. I would try to do that. And yeah, but you cannot actually pay. And I don't see the point of why not, right? I don't see the unethical point in it. Like you're giving something back to someone who is participating, right? But okay, let's talk to our ethics committee and try to convince them that they have to change their minds, right? Okay, guys, I have another question from Leonardo. Leonardo is super participant in our chat, which was very nice. So I have one last question that may be directed either to Bruna or to Julia. How effective are vocabulary naming tests to test proficiency when our target linguistic level is actually morphosyntax? Is there a positive correlation between syntactic performance and vocabulary naming tests? Good one.
I think like vocabulary tests and naming tests, they may have a different nature. So I can talk about the vocabulary test, and maybe Julia can talk about the naming tests. Especially the VLT one, it's based not only in single words, but in lemmas, so word families. For example, if you have a verb, you are including all the conjugations, right? In Portuguese, we love conjugations. In English, we don't have that many. But if you are seeing at a verb, like especially a regular verb, like study and the ones like that, you were thinking about the things, the conjugations in present and past. And if you're thinking about irregular verbs like run, ran, and it goes on, you're thinking about all of that. And if you're thinking about names, you're thinking about the derivational process. You start with a root and you add prefix, suffix, and it goes on. So vocabulary tests should take this into consideration. And you need to have a balanced corpus, because the one that Nation developed, he was based on the Brown corpus. So it takes all of this into consideration. And when I selected the words for my my stimuli, I considered like the words in COCA. I didn't have time to talk about that either. But I took into consideration the 3,000 most common words, and it includes the ones that haven't been conjugated and stuff like that are included in this mix, because participants in VLT in each level deals with a different amount of words that participant lemmas specifically should know in this level. Like the first level, the 2,000 most common lemmas in.
Just to talk about a little bit of naming tests, there is a limitation to their measurement. Like usually when we're talking proficiency with naming tests, I mean, I cannot speak about all of them, but from what I know, they are more directed towards speaking proficiency. So they are limited in what they can directly measure, but they are usually correlated with other aspects of proficiency. But I guess it also depends on the tests. But for the MINT, that is the general idea.
Leonardo said that he asked that because he's still preparing his study, and they're still, let's say, exploring their options regarding various aspects of the experiment, right? So proficiency testing being one of them. So they're thinking your contributions, with your answers, okay? Guys, I think that's it for today. If no one else has questions, right? I don't see any question there in the chat of YouTube. Let's see. Questions, right? I don't see any question there. Okay, I think we're done for this morning. And I thank you all very much, the presenters especially, okay? Natalia, I don't think Natalia was presenting right now, Robert. Let's see.
According to program I had, yes, but I'll see. Okay, so I didn't miss anything. Great.
Yeah, you missed other presentations.
Well, yeah, but not the one thing that I had marked out.
Well, the last program.
Yeah, I heard Bruna.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Okay, have a look there. Okay, thank you, guys. Thank you as well, Leonardo. Thank you for your appraisal, and we'll be back at 2 with Helena Ortiz-Broy's conference. It will be in Portuguese, okay? And the next one is by Janaína Weisheimer, and it will be in English at 3 p.m. Brasilia time. Okay, guys, thank you so much. See you later today. Bye. Okay.